A criminal tried to burn a cop alive in her own patrol car, dousing it with gasoline and lighting the match while she lay unconscious inside. They thought the flames would erase their crimes, that the evidence would turn to ash, that nobody would ask questions in a town where they owned the badge and the law. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They didn't know that less than a quarter-mile away, walking the dark mountain trails to escape his own demons, was a man trained by the United States Navy to be a weapon, and beside him walked a German shepherd who could smell violence on the wind. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. The mountains of northern Montana wear their isolation like armor. Pine Haven sits cradled in a valley where the pines grow so thick that sunlight filters through in scattered coins of gold, where the air tastes of sap and stone, and where the nearest city is a 90-mile drive over roads that vanish under snow for half the year. It's the kind of place people come to disappear, whether they're running from the law or from memories that won't let them sleep. The town itself barely claims 3,000 souls, most of them tied to the logging mill or the handful of ranches scattered across the surrounding hills. In late September, the aspens were turning gold against the evergreen darkness, and the nights carried the first whispered threats of winter. The wind came down from the peaks with teeth in it, rattling through the valley like a warning. Jake Mercer had chosen Pine Haven for exactly one reason. Nobody here knew him, and nobody asked questions. At 34, he carried himself with the kind of stillness that made people nervous without understanding why. He stood 6'2", 210 pounds of functional muscle, earned through 12 years of training that had nothing to do with gym mirrors and everything to do with staying alive in places where hesitation meant death. His hair was dark and cut short, his jaw shadowed with 3 days of stubble, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds over deep water. Those eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits and threats and angles of approach, even when he was just buying coffee. It was a habit he couldn't break, didn't want to break, because the day he stopped being vigilant was the day someone would put him in the ground. He moved with economy of motion, never wasting energy, every gesture deliberate and controlled. When he walked, his footfalls made almost no sound. When he stood, his posture was perfectly balanced, weight distributed, always ready. People in town had started to notice him over the 3 weeks since he'd arrived, renting a isolated cabin 12 miles up the mountain access road. They noticed, and they gave him space. Something about the way he occupied the world made it clear he wasn't looking for company. Beside him, always, was Titan. The German shepherd weighed 95 pounds, with a coat of obsidian black marked with tan across his legs and muzzle. At 4 years old, he was in his absolute prime, a creature of pure controlled aggression and unwavering loyalty. Titan wasn't a pet. He was a partner, forged in the same fires that had tempered Jake, trained by the same military machine that produced weapons in dog form. They'd served together in places whose names were classified, doing work that would never appear in any official record. When the Navy had medically retired Titan after shrapnel from an IED tore through his shoulder, Jake had taken terminal leave and brought him home. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either could count. The bond between them transcended commands and obedience. It was something older, something primal, trust absolute. Jake had rented the cabin because it offered what he desperately needed: silence. The kind of silence where you could hear your own thoughts, where the only sounds were wind through branches and the distant call of ravens. The structure sat on elevated ground with clear sightlines in all directions, surrounded by forest thick enough to muffle the world beyond. Inside, he kept almost nothing. A sleeping bag on the floor, a camp stove, some canned food, his rucksack with clothes and a few essentials. The walls were bare logs. There were no photographs, no decorations, no evidence that anyone actually lived there. It looked like a place where someone was hiding, or healing, or both. Every night, Jake walked. He'd learned in the desert that staying still made you a target, and even here in the supposed safety of Montana wilderness, his body demanded movement. He and Titan would set out after dark, following game trails that wound through the mountains, pushing themselves until exhaustion finally granted something resembling peace. Tonight was no different. The moon hung fat and silver overhead, bright enough to cast shadows through the canopy. The temperature had dropped into the 40s, and Jake's breath misted in the air. He wore dark tactical pants, a black thermal shirt, and boots that had walked through 3 war zones. Titan ranged ahead, a shadow among shadows, his ears swiveling to catch sounds Jake's human hearing couldn't detect. They'd been walking for nearly 2 hours, circling back toward the cabin, through a route that would bring them past the eastern edge of town, when Titan stopped. The dog's entire body went rigid, head raised, nose working the air. His ears pinned forward, and a low growl built in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable. Jake froze instantly, dropping into a half-crouch, his hand moving to the Sig Sauer holstered at his hip. He scanned the darkness, filtering the natural sounds from anything human-made. At first, nothing, then he caught it. Voices, rough laughter, the sound of glass breaking, and underneath it all, a smell that raised every instinct he'd honed over a decade of combat. Gasoline, heavy in the cold air, unmistakable and wrong. Jake moved forward in absolute silence, Titan at his heel now, both of them operating on the same wavelength that required no words. Through the trees, light flickered orange and wild, not the steady glow of a campfire, something bigger, angrier. They emerged at the tree line overlooking a wide clearing beside the county access road. In the center of that clearing, a Pine Haven Police Department patrol car sat engulfed in flames. The fire roared, consuming the vehicle with horrifying speed, black smoke boiling into the night sky. 3 men stood watching, silhouetted against the inferno. They were laughing. Jake's mind processed the scene in microseconds. The Patra. All cars' front doors were closed. The back doors were closed. Someone was inside. The men weren't trying to help. They were celebrating. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Jake didn't think. Thinking was what got people killed. He moved. His hand dropped in a sharp signal, and Titan responded instantly, both of them bursting from the tree line in perfect coordinated silence. The men by the burning patrol car didn't hear them coming until Jake was already on the closest one, slamming him face first into the gravel with a knee in his spine. The man's breath left him in a whoosh of shock. The second thug spun, reaching for something under his jacket, but Titan hit him like a missile. 95 pounds of trained aggression took him off his feet, jaws clamping around his forearm with precisely controlled voice that disarmed without severing. The man screamed. The third man, bigger than the others, managed to pull a pistol and raise it, but Jake was already moving. He closed the distance in 2 strides, deflected the weapon with his left hand, while his right drove a brutal strike into the man's solar plexus. The gun clattered to the ground. The man folded. 3 seconds. 3 men neutralized. Jake didn't pause to appreciate his work. He sprinted toward the burning patrol car, teeth slamming into him like a physical wall. Through the smoke and flame, he could see a shape slumped in the driver's seat. Female. Unconscious or worse. The front door was locked. The heat had already warped the metal. He tried the handle anyway, felt the searing pain even through his calloused palm, knew it wouldn't open. The rear door. He moved to the back, yanked the handle. It gave. The door swung open, and smoke poured out, thick and toxic. Jake pulled his thermal shirt up over his mouth and nose, reached inside and hit the release on the metal partition separating the front and back seats. It dropped with a metallic clang. The woman in the driver's seat wore a Pine Haven PD uniform. Her head lolled forward against the steering wheel. Blood matted her short black hair. Jake grabbed her under the arms and hauled backward, dragging her through the partition gap and out the rear door. Her body was dead weight, completely limp. He pulled her 20 feet from the vehicle before the gas tank ignited with a concussive whump that sent flames 50 feet into the air. The heat flash washed over them, but they were clear, barely. Jake rolled the woman onto her back, checked for pulse. Faint but present. Her breathing was shallow, labored. He scanned her injuries with practiced efficiency. Blunt force trauma to the head, swelling already visible above her left temple, bruising around her throat. Defensive wounds on her forearms. She'd fought. Someone had beaten her unconscious, then locked her in that car to burn alive. Jake's jaw tightened. He looked up at Titan, who stood 10 feet away, still holding the second attacker's arm in his jaws. the man whimpering and motionless on the ground. The first man Jake had taken down was groaning, trying to push himself up. The third was curled in a ball, gasping for air. Jake pulled out his phone. Dialed 911. A bored female voice answered. He gave the location, described a burning vehicle and injured officer, kept his tone flat and factual. The dispatcher's boredom evaporated instantly, her voice sharpening with urgency. She said help was on the way, told him to stay on the line. He hung up. Staying on the line meant answering questions, and questions meant involvement, and involvement meant exactly the kind of attention he'd come to Montana to avoid. Not his fight, not his town. But even as the thought formed, he looked down at the unconscious woman and knew he'd already crossed that line the moment he pulled her from the flames. Sirens rose in the distance, growing closer. Jake stood, walked over to the three men. The one Titan held had gone very still, recognizing that any struggle would only make the dog bite harder. Jake looked at each of them in turn, memorizing faces. The biggest one, the one who'd pulled the gun, glared up at him with murder in his eyes, despite the pain. He was maybe 40, heavily built, with a shaved head and neck tattoos crawling up from his collar. His voice came out in a rasp. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, asshole. You got no idea who you're messing with. Jake's expression didn't change. He crouched down so they were eye level, his voice low and empty of emotion. I know exactly what you are. You tried to burn a woman alive. That makes you three things: cowards, criminals, and now my problem. The man spat blood. Dalton owns this town, owns the cops, owns the sheriff. You're nobody. You're already dead, you just don't know it yet. Jake stood without responding, turned away. Titan released the second man's arm on a hand signal and moved to Jake's side, eyes never leaving the three men on the ground. The sirens were close now, lights visible through the trees, red and blue strobing across the smoke and flames. An ambulance and two sheriff's department vehicles skidded into the clearing. Doors flew open. Paramedics rushed toward the unconscious officer. Two deputies emerged from the cruisers, hands on their sidearms, barking commands for everyone to freeze and show hands. Jake raised his hands slowly, non-threateningly. Titan sat at his heel, ears forward but posture neutral. The deputies seemed confused by the scene. One of them, younger, maybe mid-20s, looked at the burning patrol car, then at the three men on the ground, then at Jake. What the hell happened here? Jake kept his voice even. I was hiking, saw the fire, pulled the officer out before the gas tank blew. Those three were here when I arrived. They didn't try to help her. One of them had a gun. It's on the ground by the big one. The other deputy, older and heavier, with a face that suggested he'd seen too much and cared too little, walked over to inspect the three men. His eyes lingered on the neck tattoos of the big one, and something passed across his expression. Recognition maybe, or concern. He turned back to Jake. You're going to need to come to the station. Give a statement. Jake nodded. Understood. Can I check on the officer first? The older deputy hesitated, then gestured toward the ambulance. The paramedics had the woman on a backboard, checking vitals, setting up an IV line. Jake approached quietly. One of the paramedics, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, glanced up at him. You the one who pulled her out? He nodded. She looked back at her patient, shook her head. Another 2 minutes and she'd be dead. Hell, another 30 seconds. You saved her life. Who is she? Jake asked. The paramedic's expression tightened. Officer Sarah Chen, 15 years on the force. Good cop. One of the only good ones left in this town. She glanced toward the deputies, lowered her voice. If those three tried to kill her, it's because she wouldn't bend, wouldn't look the other way. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. You need to be careful. Whoever ordered this won't stop because you interfered. They'll come for you too. Jake said nothing. The paramedics loaded Sarah into the ambulance, doors slamming shut, sirens wailing, as they raced toward the hospital 60 miles south. The deputies cuffed the three men, loaded them into the cruisers with surprising gentleness. No rough handling, no anger, just procedure. The older deputy walked back to Jake. Let's go. Follow us into town. Jake climbed into his truck, parked 100 yards up the access road. Titan jumped into the passenger seat. As Jake started the engine, he watched the patrol cars pull away with their prisoners, watched the fire department arrive to extinguish what remained of the burning vehicle. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was already working through the variables. Someone named Dalton owned the town, owned the cops, had just tried to murder an officer who wouldn't cooperate, and now Jake was a witness. Not his fight, not his town. He repeated it like a mantra, knowing it was already a lie. The Pinehaven Sheriff's Office occupied a squat brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1975. Jake parked his truck under a streetlight, Titan alert in the passenger seat, watching everything. Inside, the station smelled of burned coffee and old paperwork. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The older deputy, whose nameplate read Vaughn, led Jake to a small interview room with a metal table and 2 chairs. He took Jake's statement with mechanical efficiency, writing down details in a notebook with handwriting that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. When Jake finished, Vaughn looked up, his expression unreadable. "You military?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Was. Navy." Vaughn's eyes narrowed slightly. "You handle yourself like someone with training. Those 3 men are in the hospital now. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, fractured jaw." "That was you?" "Self-defense," Jake said flatly. "One of them pulled a gun." Vaughn leaned back in his chair, studying Jake like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want the answer to. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw out there, but this town has a way of handling its own problems. Best thing you can do is forget tonight happened. Go back to your cabin. Mind your business." Jake held his gaze. "A police officer nearly burned to death. That's not a problem. That's attempted murder." Vaughn's jaw tightened. Officer Chen was investigating an arson case. Things got complicated. Sometimes cops get hurt in the line of duty. It happens. "She was ambushed," Jake said quietly. "Beaten unconscious, locked in her car while someone poured gasoline on it and lit a match. That's not line of duty. That's execution." For a long moment, Vaughn said nothing. Then he stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "You seem like a smart man. Smart men know when to walk away." He left, closing the door behind him. Jake sat alone in the interview room for another 20 minutes before a different deputy, the younger one, opened the door and told him he was free to go. "No charges. Self-defense. Have a good night." Jake walked out into the cool Montana darkness, Titan at his heel. The streets were empty. The town shut down for the night. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, but didn't drive toward the cabin. Instead, he headed south, toward the hospital. It took 40 minutes on dark mountain roads, winding through valleys where the pines pressed close, and deer eyes reflected in the headlights. The hospital was a small regional facility serving 5 counties, its parking lot nearly empty at 2 in the morning. Jake left Titan in the truck with the windows cracked and walked inside. The emergency room nurse looked up from her computer, surprised to see anyone at this hour. He asked about Sarah Chen. The nurse's expression softened. "She's stable. Concussion, bruised ribs, smoke inhalation. She's sedated right now. Are you family?" Jake shook his head. "I'm the one who pulled her out." The nurse's eyes widened slightly. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Room 214, 2nd floor. But if anyone asks, I didn't tell you." Jake took the stairs. The hospital was quiet, just the distant beep of monitors and the whisper of ventilation systems. He found room 214, pushed the door open carefully. Sarah Chen lay in the bed, her face pale against white sheets, an oxygen cannula under her nose, IV lines running to her arm. Bruises darkened her throat and cheekbone. Her eyes were closed. Jake started to back out, but her voice stopped him. Weak, but conscious. "You're him, the one who pulled me out." Jake stepped inside, leaving the door cracked. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone beat me with a pipe and tried to cremate me." Her attempt at dark humor was undercut by the tremor in her voice. She opened her eyes, focused on him with effort. "Thank you. They told me another minute and I'd be dead." Jake moved closer, kept his voice low. "Who did this to you?" Sarah's expression hardened, despite the pain. She struggled to sit up slightly, winced, gave up. "Ray Kozlowski. He's head of security for Marcus Dalton. Dalton owns half this town. Logging company, real estate development, construction. On paper, he's a legitimate businessman. In reality, he's a criminal. Arson, fraud, extortion, maybe worse." Jake pulled the room's single chair closer to the bed, sat down. Tell me. Sarah took a shaky breath. I've been documenting it for 18 months. Dalton's company has been burning buildings, warehouses, old businesses, even occupied homes. Makes it look like accidents or electrical fires. Then he buys the land cheap, develops it, makes millions. I found accelerant patterns at 12 different sites. Found shell companies in his name, buying the properties within weeks of the fires. Found payments to the fire inspector, the mayor, even the sheriff. Vaughn? Sarah nodded bitterly. Tom Vaughn used to be a good cop. Gambling debts buried him. Dalton owns him now, owns most of the department. I was going to take everything I had to the state police. Tonight was supposed to be my last shift. I was documenting one more fire scene when K. Oslowski and his crew showed up. They knew. Someone told them. Where's the evidence? Sarah's eyes flicked toward the small table beside her bed. My uniform, jacket pocket, thumb drive. 18 months of documentation, photos, financial records, witness statements, everything. Jake stood, found the plastic bag containing her blood-stained uniform. He pulled out the jacket, checked the pocket. The thumb drive was small, black, no bigger than his thumbnail. He held it up, and Sarah nodded. That's it. That's everything. And now Dalton knows I have it. He'll come for it. He'll come for me. Her voice cracked. I have a daughter. Emma. She's 9. She's staying with my sister in Billings until this was over. But if Dalton finds out about her, he won't, Jake said, his voice carrying a certainty that made Sarah focus on him completely. Where's your sister's address? Sarah rattled it off from memory. Jake memorized it, pulled out his phone. Sent a single encrypted text to a number he hadn't used in 6 months. The reply came back in seconds. One word, covered. Sarah watched him, confusion and hope warring on her face. Who are you? Nobody, Jake said. Just someone who was in the wrong place at the right time. That's not an answer. Jake met her eyes. Navy SEAL, retired 3 weeks ago. I came here to be alone. Looks like that's not going to work out. Sarah stared at him, something like relief flooding her expression. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill anyone who helps me. You should walk away. Take that drive to the FBI and walk away. Jake pocketed the thumb drive. I'm taking you somewhere safe first. Can you walk? The doctor said I need to stay for observation. 72 hours minimum. Jake shook his head. You've got maybe 12 hours before someone on Dalton's payroll walks in here and finishes the job. We're leaving. Now. Sarah struggled to sit up, gasping at the pain, but forcing herself upright. Her hands shook as she pulled the IV line from her arm, pressed a tissue against the bleeding puncture. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, stood, and immediately swayed. Jake caught her, steadied her. She looked up at him, tears of frustration and pain in her eyes. I can't protect Emma like this. I can't protect anyone. You don't have to, Jake said quietly. That's my job now. He helped her into a spare set of scrubs the nurse had left in the room, kept her upright as they moved slowly toward the door. The hallway was empty. They took the elevator down, walked through the emergency room where the same nurse looked up, saw them, and deliberately looked back down at her computer. Jake guided Sarah out to his truck. Titan's tail wagged once when he saw them. Then he shifted to the back seat without command, making room. Jake helped Sarah into the passenger seat, buckled her in. She was trembling, shock and adrenaline and pain all crashing together. He started the engine and headed north, back toward the mountains, back toward his cabin, the only place he knew they might be safe, at least for a little while. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Jake kept his eyes on the road. Because somebody has to. Behind them, the hospital lights faded into darkness. Ahead, the mountains rose like sentinels against the star-filled sky. And somewhere in the shadows of Pine Haven, Marcus Dalton was learning that the woman he'd tried to burn alive had just vanished from the hospital with a stranger. A stranger who'd already put 3 of his men in the same emergency room. Jake's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was already 3 moves ahead, planning, preparing. This wasn't his fight, but it was now. They picked the wrong person to terrorize. The cabin looked different through Sarah's eyes. What Jake had seen as temporary shelter, she saw as defensive position. He helped her inside, settled her on the sleeping bag he'd laid out near the fireplace. Titan immediately moved to her side, pressing his warm bulk against her leg. The gesture was deliberate, comforting. Sarah's hand dropped to his head automatically, fingers tangling in his thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered, unclear if she was talking to the dog or the man. Jake moved through the space with efficiency that came from years of setting up safe houses in hostile territory. He checked every window, confirmed sightlines, tested the door locks. The cabin had only one entrance, elevated position, 360-degree visibility through the trees, good defensive terrain. He pulled supplies from his rucksack, first aid kit, water bottles, energy bars. Not much, but enough. He knelt beside Sarah, checked her pupils with a small flashlight. Still responsive. Concussion protocol meant keeping her awake, monitoring for deterioration. "How's your vision?" "Blurry around the edges. Headache like someone's driving nails through my skull. But I'm alive." She looked up at him, her dark eyes fierce despite the pain. "Because of you." Jake didn't respond to that. He stood, walked to the window, scanned the darkness outside. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Titan's ears swiveled toward the access road, a low sound building in his chest. Not a growl yet, just awareness. Jake pulled out his phone, the military-grade satellite unit that didn't rely on cell towers. He scrolled through his contacts, found the name he needed. The call connected after 2 rings. The voice on the other end was rough, familiar. "This is a surprise. Thought you went dark." "Change of plans," Jake said. "I need a favor. FBI jurisdiction, federal warrant." Witness protection. How fast can you move? Special Agent David Torres had served with Jake in Afghanistan, back when they were both younger and thought they were invincible. Now Torres worked organized crime out of the Billings field office. His voice sharpened. "What have you gotten into?" Jake gave him the essentials. Arson, murder attempts, corrupted local law enforcement, a thumb drive with 18 months of evidence. Torres listened without interrupting. A skill he'd learned in the teams. When Jake finished, Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus Dalton. We've had our eye on him for 2 years. Nothing solid enough to move on. If you've got documentation linking him to arson and attempted murder of a police officer, that changes everything." "Where's the witness?" "With me. She's injured, needs protection." Torres's tone shifted, became operational. "Keep her there. I'll mobilize a team, but we're 4 hours out minimum." "Can you hold that long?" Jake looked at Sarah, at Titan standing guard by the door, at the darkness pressing against the windows. "We'll hold." "One more thing," Torres said. "If Dalton's as connect, as you say, he'll know you made this call within the hour. Everyone you love, everyone you've talked to, they'll become targets. You understand that?" "I understand." Torres exhaled slowly. 4 hours. Stay alive. He disconnected. Jake pocketed the phone, turned back to Sarah. She'd been listening, her expression a mix of hope and terror. "Federal protection. That's real? That's actually happening?" "It's happening, but we need to survive until they get here." Jake moved to his rucksack. Started pulling items out. A tactical vest. Extra magazines for his Sig Sauer. A combat knife. A pair of night vision goggles. Sarah watched him prepare with growing realization of exactly how serious the next few hours were going to be. "How many will come?" she asked quietly. "All of them," Jake said. "If Dalton's smart, he'll throw everything he has at this location before federal agents arrive." He pulled the thumb drive from his pocket, held it up. "This is evidence that can destroy him. He can't let it reach the FBI, which means he can't let us live." Sarah's face went pale. "I'm sorry, and so sorry I dragged you into this." Jake looked at her directly. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this." He turned to Titan, spoke in German, "Bewachen." The dog's posture shifted immediately, moving into active guard mode, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and windows simultaneously. Meanwhile, 12 miles south in Pine Haven, Marcus Dalton stood in his study with a phone pressed to his ear, listening to news that made his blood pressure spike. "The woman's gone. Hospital says she checked herself out. And the man who pulled her from the car, we got an ID. Name's Jake Mercer. Retired Navy SEAL as of 3 weeks ago. Rented the Miller cabin up on Ridge Road. Dalton was 52, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people in town made in a month. His study was all leather and dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley he'd systematically taken control of over 8 years. He'd built an empire here, brick by brick, fire by fire, and now some jarhead with a hero complex was threatening everything. "How many men do we have available?" The voice on the phone belonged to Ray Kozlowski, calling from the hospital where doctors had just reset his dislocated shoulder. 6, maybe 7 if we pull everyone. "But boss, this guy's military. Special forces. He put me and 2 others down in under 5 seconds. We might want to think about this." Dalton's voice went cold. "I don't pay you to think. I pay you to solve problems. Officer Chen has evidence that can put me in prison for the rest of my life. That evidence needs to disappear. She needs to disappear. And anyone helping her needs to disappear. You understand?" Kozlowski hesitated. "What about the fire department? We could make it look like an accident. Cabin fire, no survivors, evidence destroyed." Dalton smiled without humor. "Now you're thinking. Burn it to the ground, and make sure nobody walks out." Back at the cabin, Jake had finished his preparations. He'd positioned emergency supplies near the back window, a go bag with water and first aid. He'd set up early warning indicators, fishing lines strung across approaches with tin cans attached. Low tech, but effective. He'd memorized egress routes, backup positions, rally points. Sarah watched him work, seeing the transformation from quiet civilian to combat operator. When he was finished, he sat down across from her, his expression serious. "I need you to understand something. When they come, and they will come, I need you to follow my instructions exactly. No hesitation. No questions. Your survival depends on doing what I say when I say it. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded. "I can. If something happens to me, you take Titan and you run." He knows the command. "Flucht. It means escape. He'll lead you to safety and protect you until help arrives." "Nothing's gonna happen to you," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Jake stood, moved back to the window. Titan's ears had gone flat against his skull, his body rigid. Jake felt it too, that electric sense of threat closing in. They were coming. He could feel it like pressure in the air before a storm. He pulled on the tactical vest, checked his weapon, chambered around. Sarah struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain, and moved to stand beside him. She looked small and fragile, bruised and barely able to stand, but her eyes held steel. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for giving Emma a chance." Jake didn't look at her. "We're not done yet." Outside, in the darkness between the trees, headlights appeared on the access road. Not one vehicle. 3. Moving slowly, deliberately, without sirens or urgency. Hunting. Titan's growl built into something deeper, more primal. Sarah's breath caught. Jake's expression didn't change. His voice was calm, almost quiet. "Here we go." The vehicle stopped a quarter-mile down the road, out of direct line of sight. Doors opened and closed. The sounds carrying through the still mountain air, men's voices, low and tactical. They were spreading out, surrounding the cabin. Professional approach. Jake counted at least 6 distinct voices, maybe more. He looked at Titan, gave a hand signal. The dog moved to Sarah's side, pressed against her leg. Jake turned to her one last time. "Stay low, stay quiet, trust me." Then he opened the door and stepped out into the night, alone. To face what was coming, the night air tasted of pine and coming violence. Jake moved off the cabin's small porch with deliberate silence, dropping into the shadows where moonlight couldn't reach. He'd left the cabin door slightly ajar, enough that Titan could hear everything, respond if needed. His Sig Sauer was in his hand, an extension of his body after years of muscle memory. He controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate, let his vision adjust fully to the darkness. The forest around him was alive with movement, branches snapping under careless feet, the metallic click of weapons being checked. They were trying for stealth, but failing. Amateurs playing at tactics they'd seen in movies. Jake counted positions by sound. 2 coming from the east, moving through thick underbrush. 1 from the north, trying to flank wide. At least 3 approaching directly up the access road. He couldn't see them yet, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly where they were, where they'd be in 30 seconds, where their attention would focus. He moved like smoke through the trees. circling behind the eastern pair. They were whispering to each other, nervous energy making them careless. One of them was saying something about how this was going to be easy, how one guy couldn't take all of them, how they'd be done and drinking beer within the hour. Jake materialized behind them without sound. His voice cut through the darkness, low and cold. "You're wrong." Both men spun, bringing weapons up, but Jake was already moving. He closed the distance before they could acquire targets, striking the first man's wrist with precise force that sent his pistol spinning into the darkness. The second man tried to backpedal, raise his shotgun, but Jake was inside his reach. An elbow to the solar plexus folded him. A knee to the face as he doubled over put him on the ground. The first man lunged forward, trying to tackle, but Jake sidestepped and used the man's momentum against him. A controlled throw sent him crashing into a pine tree trunk. Both men stayed down, gasping and disoriented. Jake was gone before they could recover, melting back into shadow. He'd made noise deliberately that time. Let them know he wasn't cowering in the cabin. Let them understand they were being hunted, not hunting. Shouts erupted from multiple directions. Someone called for Ray. Jake smiled without humor. Kozlowski was here. Good. Time to end this properly. He moved north, intercepting the flanker before the man realized danger was coming from behind instead of ahead. This one was smarter, more alert. He sensed Jake at the last second, started to turn, but training beat reaction time every time. Jake disarmed him with a wrist lock that left the man's pistol in Jake's offhand, and the man himself face down in the dirt with Jake's knee in his back. Jake took the gun, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, tossed the components in 3 different directions. "Stay down," he said quietly. The man nodded frantically, having no intention of doing otherwise. 3 down, at least 3 more to go. A voice boomed from near the access road, rough and angry. "Mercer, we know you're out here. We know the cops in that cabin. Just hand her over and walk away. Nobody else has to get hurt." Jake recognized the voice from the clearing where Sarah had nearly died. Kozlowski. He didn't bother responding. Words were just noise. He moved toward the voice with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was already trapped. The cabin sat above them on elevated ground. Anyone approaching from the road had to come uphill through sparse cover. Poor tactical position. They'd chosen aggression over strategy. Fatal mistake. 2 men were visible now, crouched behind a truck they'd parked across the access road. One held a rifle, the other a shotgun. They were focused on the cabin, watching the door and windows for movement. They didn't see Jake approaching from their right flank, using the terrain and shadows. He was within 20 feet when Titan's bark shattered the night. Not from the cabin, from behind the men. The dog had circled out through a window, following Jake's scent, positioning himself for a coordinated assault without being told. The men spun toward the sound, and in that instant of divided attention, Jake moved. He took the rifleman first, closing distance in 3 explosive strides, deflecting the barrel upward with his left hand, while his right drove the pistol grip into the man's temple. The man dropped, like a puppet with cut strings. The second man tried to swing his shotgun around, but Titan hit him from behind, jaws clamping on his forearm with controlled aggression. The man screamed, dropped the weapon, fell to his knees. Jake was there in a second, kicking the shotgun away, securing the man with a knee and an armbar that gave him exactly 2 choices: submit or have his elbow destroyed. He submitted. Titan released on Jake's hand signal, moving back but staying alert. 4 down. Kozlowski's voice came from somewhere in the darkness ahead, closer to the cabin now, tighter, angry. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think this changes anything? Dalton owns this whole county. You're just making it worse for yourself." Jake finally spoke, his voice carrying through the trees with absolute calm. "Last chance, Kozlowski. Take your men and leave. This ends now, or it ends badly for you. Choose." The response was a gunshot. The round hit a tree 3 feet to Jake's left, bark exploding. Amateur panic fire. No sight picture, no controlled breathing. Jake didn't flinch. He tracked the muzzle flash, saw Kozlowski's position. The man was behind a fallen log 40 yards from the cabin, partially exposed. He had one more man with him, younger, clearly terrified. That one was holding a pistol, like it might bite him. Jake moved forward with Titan shadowing him, both of them using cover and concealment. Another shot from Kozlowski, closer this time, but still wild. The man was rattled, losing control. Jake got within 30 yards and stopped. He could make the shot from here easily, but killing wasn't the objective. Ending the threat was. He pulled a flashlight from his vest, aimed it at Kozlowski's position, and clicked it on for a half-second, just long enough to illuminate both men, blind them, and mark their exact positions. Kozlowski fired at the light, but Jake had already moved. He came in from an angle, fast and low. The younger man saw him first, tried to raise his weapon, but Jake batted it aside and struck him once in the jaw. He went down hard and stayed there. Kozlowski spun, bringing his pistol around. And for a frozen moment they faced each other at 10 feet. The bigger man's face was twisted with rage and fear. His shoulder was bandaged from their last encounter, his movements stiff with pain. He was breathing hard, sweating despite the cold. "You should have stayed out of this," he snarled. Jake's expression was empty of emotion. "You should have left her alone." Kozlowski pulled the trigger. Click. Empty magazine. He'd lost count in his panic. Burned through his ammunition, shooting at shadows. His eyes widened with the realization. Jake didn't shoot him, didn't need to. He closed the distance in 2 strides, disarmed him with brutal efficiency, and put him on the ground with an arm lock that made the bigger man howl. Titan appeared at Jake's side, teeth bared, inches from Kozlowski's face. The man went absolutely still. Jake leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You tried to burn a woman alive. You came to kill her again. You threatened a child. The only reason you're breathing right now is because I need you alive to testify. But if you move, if you speak, if you even think about trying something, I'll let my dog finish what I started." Kozlowski nodded frantically, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. Jake stood, looked around at the scattered men, 6 in total, all down, some unconscious, some conscious but unwilling to continue. The entire assault had taken less than 10 minutes. He pulled out zip ties from his vest, secured Kozlowski and the others who were still mobile enough to be threats. Titan stood guard, ensuring nobody developed sudden courage. When Jake was satisfied they were contained, he pulled out his phone and called Torres. "We're secure. Multiple hostiles neutralized. We're going to need local law enforcement for prisoner transport." Torres's voice carried relief and disbelief in equal measure. "You took down Dalton's entire crew by yourself?" "I had help," Jake said, looking at Titan. The dog's tail wagged once. The sound of an engine cut through the night, not from the access road, from the main highway beyond. Jake's instincts flared. He moved to higher ground, scanned the darkness. A vehicle was approaching fast, headlights cutting through the trees. But this wasn't another truck full of thugs. This was a luxury SUV, black and polished, completely out of place in the wilderness. It skidded to a stop near the blocked access road. The driver's door opened, and Marcus Dalton himself stepped out. He was exactly as Sarah had described. Silver hair, expensive clothes, the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute control, but his expression was twisted with rage. He saw his men on the ground, saw Jake standing over them with Titan at his side, and something broke inside him. He reached back into the SUV and pulled out a rifle, not a hunting rifle, an AR-15, military style, with a high-capacity magazine. His voice was a roar. "You destroyed everything, everything I built." Jake's hand moved to his sidearm, but Dalton was already raising the rifle, finger on the trigger, pure murderous intent in his eyes. Time slowed. Jake calculated angles, distances, the fact that Sarah was still in the cabin behind him, that any wild shots could hit her. He started to move, started to draw, knowing he was a fraction of a second too slow. Then the cabin door flew open and Sarah Chen stepped out, still wearing hospital scrubs, still barely able to stand, but holding Kozlowski's confiscated pistol in a 2-handed grip that showed years of training. Her voice cut through the night, strong despite her injuries. "Drop it, Dalton. FBI is 4 minutes out. It's over." Dalton swung the rifle toward her. Jake's world narrowed to a single point of absolute clarity. He drew and fired in one smooth motion. The shot took Dalton in the shoulder, spinning him, the rifle clattering from his hands. The man collapsed, screaming, clutching his wound. Jake was moving before Dalton hit the ground, kicking the rifle away, securing the threat. Titan barked once, sharp and final. Sarah lowered the pistol, her hands shaking violently. Jake moved to her, steadied her. "You shouldn't have come out." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I should have. This was my fight too." In the distance, sirens finally rose. Real sirens this time. Federal vehicles with agents who couldn't be bought. Jake helped Sarah sit down on the porch steps, Titan pressing against her side. They sat together in silence, watching the flashing lights approach through the trees. Watching Marcus Dalton's empire collapse around him, the nightmare was ending. Justice was coming. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Jake Mercer felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. The FBI descended on the scene with the efficiency of a military operation. 3 black SUVs came up the access road, followed by an ambulance and a Montana State Police transport van. Special Agent David Torres emerged from the lead vehicle, tall and solid, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. 6 men zip-tied and sitting against trees under Titan's watchful guard. Marcus Dalton bleeding and cursing on the ground. Sarah Chen barely conscious on the porch steps. And Jake Mercer standing in the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane that had just passed through. Torres walked directly to Jake, and for a moment the 2 men just looked at each other. Then Torres shook his head slowly. "You couldn't just enjoy retirement, could you? Wasn't really working out anyway," Jake said. Torres turned to his team, started issuing orders. "Secure the prisoners. Get medical on Dalton and the woman. I want statements from everyone conscious enough to talk. Process this scene by the book. Everything admissible." His agents moved with practiced coordination, reading rights, documenting injuries, photographing evidence. 2 paramedics approached Sarah, but she waved them off until she'd given Jake the thumb drive from her pocket. He handed it to Torres. 18 months of documentation. Arson, fraud, witness intimidation, attempted murder. It's all there. Torres held the small device like it was made of gold. This is going to bring down a lot of people, not just Dalton. Everyone he owned. He looked at Sarah. "You did good work, Officer Chen. Brave work." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I just wanted to do my job. Shouldn't be brave to do your job." The paramedics insisted this time, guiding her to the ambulance. She looked back at Jake, something unspoken passing between them. He nodded once. She'd be safe now. The system would protect her. As the ambulance doors closed, Torres turned back to Jake. "We need your statement. All of it. Self-defense or not. You put 8 men in the hospital in 2 days. That requires paperwork." They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Jake recounted the initial rescue at the burning patrol car, the hospital extraction, the defensive preparation, the assault on the cabin. He spoke in flat, factual terms, leaving out nothing. Other agents interviewed the captured men separately. Kozlowski, facing life in prison, broke within the first hour and started talking. He detailed 3 years of working for Dalton, named every fire they'd set, every bribe they'd paid, every threat they'd made. He gave up Sheriff Vaughn, 2 town council members, the fire inspector, and a judge. The conspiracy was larger than even Sarah had documented. Dawn was breaking over the mountains by the time Torres closed his notebook. "You know you're going to be subpoenaed for trial. Multiple trials, probably. This case is going to take years to fully prosecute." Jake looked out at the forest turning gold with morning light. "I'll be there. Whatever you need." Torres studied him. "You're different than you were in Afghanistan. Quieter. Like you're carrying something heavy." Jake didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "Last mission. We were extracting a CIA asset from Kandahar. Intel said the compound was clear except for the target. It wasn't. There were children inside. Civilians. When the shooting started, they got caught in the crossfire. 3 of them didn't make it." He looked down at his hands. "I did everything right, followed every protocol, made every correct tactical decision. But those kids are still dead. I came here to forget that." "Turns out, you can't." Torres was quiet for a moment. "And now? Now I remember why I did the job in the first place. Not to fight enemies, to protect innocents." Jake looked at Titan, who was sleeping near the cabin steps, exhausted from the night's work. "Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Not run from what happened, but make sure it means something. You saved Sarah Chen's life. Probably saved her daughter's life too, by stopping this before Dalton escalated further. That means something." The sound of another vehicle approached. Not FBI. A civilian car, driving too fast on the mountain road. It skidded to a stop, and a woman jumped out, mid-30s, with Sarah's eyes and a 9-year-old girl beside her. The sister from Billings, and Emma. The little girl's eyes were wide with fear. "Where's my mom? Is she okay?" Torres intercepted them, spoke calmly. "Your mother is safe. She's at the hospital being treated for injuries, but she's going to be fine. The threat to your family is over. Marcus Dalton and his associates are in federal custody." Emma looked past Torres, directly at Jake. "You're the one who saved her. The man with the dog." Jake knelt down so he was at eye level with the child. "I helped. Your mom's the real hero." She stood up when nobody else would. Emma walked past Torres, past the FBI agents, walked right up to Jake. "Can I meet your dog?" Jake glanced at Titan, who was awake now, watching the child with gentle interest. His tail wagged slowly. Jake gestured and Titan approached, moving carefully, reading the situation with the intelligence that made him exceptional. Emma reached out tentatively, and Titan pressed his head into her small hand. She started crying then, all the fear and stress of the past days pouring out. Titan sat perfectly still, letting her hug him, giving her something solid and warm and safe to hold on to. Sarah's sister, who introduced herself as Linda, wiped her own tears. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. My sister told me everything on the phone. You risked your life for her, for us." Jake stood, uncomfortable with the gratitude, just did what needed doing. Linda shook her head. "Most people don't. Most people look away. You didn't." She took Emma's hand gently. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go see Mom." As they drove away toward the hospital, Torres's phone rang. He answered, listened, his expression growing darker. When he disconnected, he looked at Jake. That was the U.S. Attorney's Office. Based on preliminary interviews and the evidence on that thumb drive, they're estimating at least 35 criminal counts against Dalton. Arson, conspiracy to commit murder, witness tampering, fraud, racketeering. He's looking at spending the rest of his life in federal prison. Kozlowski too, and about a dozen others are going to fall with them. Jake felt something loosen in his chest. Justice. Real justice. Sarah didn't suffer for nothing. No, she didn't. Torres hesitated, then added, "There's something else. Your extraction of Officer Chen from the hospital. Technically, that's against medical advice and hospital protocols. Some lawyers might argue it was kidnapping." Jake's expression went flat. "Are you serious?" Torres smiled slightly. "Relax. The U.S. attorney already ruled it justifiable under the circumstances. Chen was in imminent danger. You removed her to a secure location and you immediately contacted federal authorities. It's clean. You're clean." He clapped Jake on the shoulder. "You did good work here, Mercer. Saved lives. Brought down a major criminal organization. The kind of work that deserves recognition. I don't want recognition. I want to be left alone." Torres laughed. "Too late for that. You're going to be a witness in the biggest federal case Montana's seen in 20 years. Your face is going to be on the news. People are going to call you a hero." Jake looked away, toward the mountains. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who was in the right place at the right time. Heroes never think they're heroes. That's what makes them heroes." Torres checked his watch. "We're done here for now. Get some rest. We'll need detailed depositions in the next few days. But for now, you're free to go." Jake walked back to his cabin with Titan at his side. The structure looked different now. What had been a hiding place was now a battlefield, scorched with violence, but ultimately a place where good had triumphed over evil. Inside, he saw Sarah's blood on the floor where she'd collapsed, the overturned chair from their preparations, the scattered remains of a night that had changed everything. He cleaned methodically, restoring order, giving his hands something to do while his mind processed. Titan lay by the door, watching him with knowing eyes. When the cabin was clean, Jake sat on the porch steps as the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in 3 weeks, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like peace. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Linda Chen. Sarah wants to thank you in person when she's released from the hospital. Emma wants to see Titan again. Would tomorrow work?" Jake looked at Titan. The dog's tail wagged. He typed back, "Tomorrow works." Another text arrived, this one from Torres. "Forgot to mention. Sarah's going to need a place to stay while her house is processed as a crime scene." FBI will put her in a hotel, but if you have space. Jake looked at the cabin. One sleeping bag, minimal supplies, barely enough for himself. But the forest was full of resources. And he'd operated with less and worse conditions. He texted back, "She can stay here. We'll make it work." Torres's response was immediate. "Figured you'd say that. You're a good man, Mercer." Jake put the phone away. The morning was beautiful, cold and clear. The kind of morning that made you grateful to be alive. Somewhere in the valley below, Marcus Dalton sat in a cell, his empire crumbling. Somewhere in a hospital, Sarah Chen was healing. Her daughter safe, her evidence finally in the hands of people who would use it to deliver justice. And here, in a cabin in the mountains, a retired Navy SEAL who'd come looking for solitude had found something. Better. Purpose. The war wasn't over. It never would be. But maybe fighting it alongside people worth protecting was the answer he'd been looking for all along. The hospital released Sarah Chen 3 days later. Jake drove down to pick her up with Titan in the back seat, the morning air crisp with the promise of an early winter. He found her in the lobby with Emma and Linda, signing discharge papers with hands that still trembled slightly. The bruises on her face had deepened to purple and yellow, and she moved carefully, favoring her ribs, but her eyes were clear and determined. When she saw Jake, something passed across her expression. Relief, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. Emma broke away from her aunt and ran to Titan, dropping to her knees to wrap her arms around the dog's neck. He accepted the embrace with patient dignity, tail wagging slowly. "I missed you," the little girl whispered into his fur. Titan licked her cheek once, gentle as a whisper. Linda approached Jake, extending her hand. "I'm heading back to Billings today. Work won't wait forever, but Sarah and Emma are going to stay here. The FBI says it's safe now, and Sarah needs to be close for the investigation." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah told me about your offer. Letting them stay at your cabin until her house is released. That's generous. More than generous. It's practical," Jake said simply. "She needs protection until all of Dalton's associates are rounded up. I can provide that." Linda studied him with the frank assessment of someone who'd spent years protecting her younger sister. "You're a good man, Mr. Mercer. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She hugged Sarah goodbye, kissed Emma's forehead, and left with promises to call every day. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Emma sat in the back with Titan, telling him stories about school and her friends, apparently unconcerned that the dog couldn't answer. Sarah watched the mountains roll past, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. "They arrested Sheriff Vaughn this morning. The mayor, too. Federal agents went through the whole department. Turns out half the force was taking Dalton's money." She turned to look at Jake. "You knew, didn't you? When Vaughn interviewed you that first night, you knew he was dirty." Jake kept his eyes on the road. "I suspected. He was too eager for me to forget what I'd seen. Too protective of the men who tried to kill you. 15 years I worked with him, trusted him." Sarah's voice was bitter. "And he sold me out for gambling debts and cash. People make choices. Sometimes those choices reveal who they really are." They reached the cabin to find it transformed. Jake had spent the past 3 days preparing. He'd driven into town, bought supplies with cash, avoiding attention. A second sleeping bag, blankets, a camp cot for Emma. Food that wasn't just military rations. A propane heater to fight the growing cold. Books for Emma. Medical supplies for Sarah. The cabin was still Spartan, still temporary, but it was functional, livable. Sarah stood in the doorway, taking it in. Her voice was soft. "You did this for us. I had time." "Jake," she turned to face him, "thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For protecting Emma. For giving us a place to be safe. I know you came here to be alone, and we're invading that. And I'm sorry. But I don't know what else to do right now." Jake set down the bags he was carrying. "You're not invading anything. We needed help. I helped. That's all." Emma explored the cabin with a child's curiosity, Titan shadowing her like a protective ghost. She found the small collection of books Jake had bought, gasped with delight at a dog-eared copy of Where the Red Fern Grows. "Can I read this?" "It's yours," Jake said. Emma beamed at him, settled onto the cot, and immediately lost herself in the pages. Titan lay down beside her, his presence a warm constant. That evening, Jake made dinner on the camp stove. Nothing fancy, just pasta and canned sauce, but it was hot and filling. They ate together at the small table. 3 people who'd been strangers 5 days ago, now bound by violence and survival. Emma talked about school, about her friends, about how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up so she could help animals like Titan. Sarah watched her daughter with eyes that kept filling with tears she refused to shed. After Emma went to sleep, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch steps, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The stars overhead were infinite, undimmed by city lights. Sarah spoke quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. The FBI told me today that they found evidence connecting Dalton to 2 deaths. An old woman who wouldn't sell her property. A journalist who was asking too many questions. They made them look like accidents. But the evidence on my thumb drive helped them see the pattern. She wrapped the blanket tighter. I could have been number 3. Emma could have been an orphan. But you're not. And she's not. You stood up when it mattered. That took courage. Sarah laughed without humor. I was terrified. I still am. What if they missed someone? What if there's another person on Dalton's payroll who decides to finish what he started? Then they'll have to go through me, Jake said simply, and they won't succeed. Sarah looked at him in the starlight. Why are you doing this? Really, you don't owe us anything. You could have walked away a dozen times. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of things he'd never said out loud. My last mission overseas, civilians died. Children. It wasn't my fault, not technically. But they died while I was supposed to be protecting them. I came here trying to forget that. Trying to outrun the guilt. He looked up at the stars. But maybe the answer isn't forgetting. Maybe it's making sure it means something. That I use what I learned, what I became, to actually protect people who need it. He turned to Sarah. You needed protection. Emma needed protection. So that's what I'm doing. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed once. You saved us. Not just from Dalton. You gave us hope that the world still has people who stand up. That's worth more than you know. They sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. Jake gave Sarah the sleeping bag, took the floor with just a blanket. Titan positioned himself between Jake and Emma's cot, ever vigilant even in sleep. The cabin creaked and settled around them, and for the first time since Jake had arrived in Montana. The silence felt like sanctuary instead of isolation. The next morning, Agent Torres called. The news was comprehensive. Dalton had been formally charged with 38 federal counts. Kozlowski had turned state's witness and was cooperating fully. 7 members of the Pine Haven Sheriff's Department had been arrested. The mayor had resigned and was negotiating a plea deal. The fire inspector had fled but been apprehended at the Canadian border. The entire criminal network was collapsing like a house of cards. More importantly, Torres said, we've cleared Chen's house. She can go home whenever she's ready. Jake relayed the information to Sarah. She received it with mixed emotions, relief and apprehension warring on her face. That's good. That's great. Emma needs her own bed, her own things. But the thought of going back to that house, knowing Dalton's men had been watching it, planning. You don't have to go back, Jake said. Not if you're not ready. But we can't stay here forever. This is your space. Your healing. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Are we going home? Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Jake, then back at Emma. Soon, sweetie. Very soon. Over the next week, they established a rhythm. Jake drove Emma to school each morning, Titan in the back seat, serving as the world's most intimidating bus service. Other kids stared in awe at the massive German Shepherd, and Emma's status among her peers elevated considerably. Sarah attended daily FBI debriefings, giving detailed testimony that would form the backbone of the prosecution. In the afternoons, they returned to the cabin, and slowly, carefully, Sarah began to heal. Not just her body, but her spirit. Jake trained in the mornings, running through the mountains with Titan, maintaining the edge that had kept him alive through a dozen deployments. But now the training had purpose beyond personal survival. He was protecting something that mattered. Someone who mattered. 2 someones. Emma asked him one evening, while Sarah was cooking dinner, "Will you stay?" After we go back to our house, will you still be here? Jake had been dreading that question. His lease on the cabin was month to month. He'd come to Montana with no plans beyond escaping memories. But now, looking at this 9-year-old girl who'd been through more trauma than any child should face, who looked at him like he was a hero from one of her books, he couldn't imagine leaving. Not yet, I'll stay as long as you need me to. Emma hugged him, fierce and sudden. Good, because you're family now. You and Titan both. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat with Jake on the porch again. It had become their ritual, these quiet conversations under the stars. The FBI wants me back on the force, she said. New sheriffs being appointed, someone from the state police with no local connections. He wants honest cops to rebuild the department. They're offering me a promotion. Detective. That's good, Jake said. You earned it. I don't know if I can go back. Every time I put on the uniform, I'll remember Kozlowski's hands around my throat. The smell of gasoline. The flames. She wrapped her arms around herself. How do you do it? How do you keep going after trauma like that? Jake considered the question carefully. You don't forget it. You carry it. But you choose what it means. Does it break you, or does it make you stronger? Does it make you hide, or does it make you fight harder for what's right? He looked at her directly. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Sarah. You stood alone against corruption that had infected your entire town. You gathered evidence knowing it could get you killed. You fought for justice when it would have been easier to look away. That's not weakness. That's the definition of courage. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks, catching starlight. Thank you for seeing that, for reminding me. The following week, Sarah made her decision. She accepted the promotion. She and Emma moved back into their house, which the FBI had thoroughly secured and equipped with a new alarm system. But Jake was there every morning to drive Emma to school. He was there every evening for dinner. He was there when Sarah woke from nightmares, when Emma cried for her father, when the weight of everything threatened to crush them. And slowly, day by day, they healed together, not as strangers thrown together by violence, but as something more, a family forged in fire and built on trust. Jake had come to Montana looking for peace in isolation. Instead, he'd found peace in purpose, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, in standing up when others wouldn't, in being the person he'd always been trained to be, but now with clarity about why it mattered. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand. 3 months later, winter had fully claimed the Montana mountains. Snow lay thick across the valley, transforming Pine Haven into something from a postcard. The town had changed in ways both visible and invisible. New faces occupied the sheriff's department. Marcus Dalton's property sat empty, seized by federal authorities, awaiting auction. The logging mill had new ownership, local people who'd bought it collectively to keep jobs in the community. Slowly, carefully, Pine Haven was healing from the corruption that had infected it for nearly a decade. Jake Mercer stood in the backyard of Sarah Chen's house, watching Emma and Titan play in the snow. The dog bounded through drifts with puppy-like enthusiasm, the 9-year-old girl laughing as she tried to keep up. 3 months had put color back in Emma's cheeks, confidence back in her stride. She no longer flinched at loud noises or watched the door with fearful eyes. She was becoming a child again instead of a trauma survivor. Jake felt something worn settle in his chest watching them. Pride, maybe, or peace, or both. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Jake. She'd returned to work 6 weeks ago, thrown herself into rebuilding the department with the new sheriff. The promotion to detective suited her. She'd already closed 2 cold cases and earned respect from officers who'd initially doubted her. The bruises had faded from her face. The nightmares came less frequently. She was stronger now, tempered by fire into something unbreakable. They called this morning, she said quietly. Trial date is set, 6 months from now. They expecting it to last 3 weeks. Jake nodded. I'll be there. Every day you need me. I know. Sarah sipped her coffee, watching her daughter play. That's the thing about you, Jake. You're always there. Every morning, driving Emma to school. every evening for dinner, every weekend helping with repairs around the house. She turned to look at him. You know you don't have to, right? We're safe now. Dalton's in PR. Isan, his network is destroyed. You've done more than anyone could ever ask. I know I don't have to. I want to. Sarah smiled, something complicated in her expression. Emma asked me yesterday if you were going to be her new dad. I didn't know what to tell her. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Titan and Emma. What did you say? That you're family. That family doesn't always mean the same thing it used to. That some people come into our lives exactly when we need them and stay because they choose to, not because they have to. She set down her coffee mug. Was that the right answer? Jake looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd stood against corruption when everyone around her had bent. This woman who'd nearly died for doing what was right. This woman who'd somehow taken his broken pieces and helped him build something new. Yeah, that was exactly the right answer. Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not ready to be. I know you came here to heal, to deal with your own trauma. We've complicated that. Made demands on you that maybe weren't fair. Jake shook his head. You didn't complicate anything. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Purpose. A reason to wake up that isn't about running from the past. He looked at their joined hands. I spent 12 years fighting enemies overseas. The last 3 months, I've spent protecting people who matter. People who are worth fighting for. That's the mission I was always supposed to have. I just didn't know it until now. Emma's voice called out from the snow. Jake, come help us build a snow fort. Titan needs proper fortifications. Jake laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. He squeezed Sarah's hand once and then waded out into the snow. Titan bounded over, covered in white powder, tail wagging furiously. Emma immediately began issuing architectural instructions with the seriousness of a general planning a siege. Jake followed her directions, packing snow into walls, creating ramparts, all while Titan supervised and occasionally destroyed their work by charging through it. Sarah watched from the porch, her phone in hand. She'd received an email that morning, one she hadn't shared with Jake yet. It was from a woman in Idaho, passed along by Agent Torres. The woman's name was Rebecca Martinez, and her message was desperate. Her brother had witnessed a murder committed by a local drug cartel. Now the family was being threatened, their home vandalized, the local police either unable or unwilling to help. She'd heard about what happened in Pine Haven, heard about the Navy SEAL who'd stood up to corruption and won. She was asking for help, begging for it. Sarah read the email again, looked at Jake playing with her daughter in the snow, and made a decision. That evening, after Emma was in bed and Titan was sprawled by the fireplace, Sarah showed Jake the email. He read it in silence, his expression growing focused in a way she recognized, the warrior emerging beneath the surface. Torres forwarded this to you? Jake asked. He thought I should see it, thought you should see it. He said there are more, dozens more. People from all over who've heard about Pine Haven and are reaching out, hoping someone will help them stand up to the people crushing them. Jake set down the phone, stared at the fire. I'm not a cop. I'm not a private investigator. I don't have any official authority. No, Sarah agreed. But you have skills, training, experience, and more importantly, you have something most people don't. You have the courage to stand up when it's easier to walk away. She sat beside him on the couch. I'm not saying you have to help everyone who asks. That would be impossible. But maybe some of them, the ones who really need it, the ones with nowhere else to turn. Jake was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decision. I'd need support. Intel, logistics, someone I could trust to coordinate. Sarah smiled. I'm a detective now. I have access to databases, connections with law enforcement across 5 states, and Torres offered to help too. He thinks what you did here matters, thinks it could matter elsewhere. Jake looked at her. This isn't your fight. You have Emma to think about, a career to rebuild, a life to live. And I'll live it. We'll live it. But that doesn't mean we can't help others along the way. Emma needs to see that standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves is what good people do. You've already taught her that. This would just be continuing the lesson. Titan raised his head from where he'd been sleeping, looked at Jake with knowing eyes. The dog had served beside him in war zones across 3 continents. He'd tracked insurgents through desert mountains and detected IEDs that saved countless lives. He was 4 years old, in his prime, still capable of everything the military had trained him to do. And like Jake, he'd been searching for a purpose beyond just surviving. Jake pulled out his phone, opened a secure messaging app, and typed a message to Torres. Need to talk about the Idaho situation and about what comes after. The response came within minutes. Was hoping you'd say that. Let's build something. Something that matters. Over the following weeks, they laid the groundwork. Torres connected them with a network of federal agents frustrated by jurisdictional limitations and local corruption. Sarah used her contacts to establish an information pipeline. Jake reached out to former SEAL teammates who'd also struggled with civilian transition, who'd been looking for ways to use their skills for something meaningful. Not all of them were interested, but enough were. Enough to form the foundation of something unprecedented. Not a security company, not vigilantes, something in between. People who would go where traditional law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't, who would stand beside victims facing impossible odds, who would level the playing field when power and corruption threatened to crush the innocent. They called it Sentinel. Jake hated the name, thought it was too dramatic, but Emma had suggested it, and her opinion mattered more than his comfort. The 9-year-old had drawn a logo, a shepherd dog standing guard over a child. It was perfect. The first official case came in February, the Martinez family in Idaho. Jake spent 2 weeks there with Titan, gathering evidence, protecting witnesses, coordinating with federal authorities until a major drug trafficking network collapsed and 3 dirty cops went to prison. The family was relocated through witness protection, safe and grateful. The second case was in Wyoming. Angie, a ranch family being forced off their land by an energy company using intimidation and sabotage. Jake brought in 2 former teammates, and together they documented enough corporate malfeasance to trigger an SEC investigation and criminal charges. By spring, Sentinel had handled 6 cases. By summer, 12. Word spread through networks of desperate people, whispered in online forums and support groups. If you've been failed by the system, if corruption has you trapped, if violence threatens those you love and nobody with a badge will help, there's someone who might. A warrior who stands with the vulnerable. A protector who can't be bought or intimidated. Hope when there is no other hope. Jake stood in Sarah's backyard on a warm June evening, watching Titan and Emma play fetch. The dog was tireless, the girl laughing with pure joy. Sarah joined him, sliding her arm around his waist naturally. Tomorrow he'd be flying to Arizona for a new case. A tribal community being terrorized by a militia group, local sheriff looking the other way. It would be dangerous, it would take weeks, but it was necessary. Come back safe, Sarah said quietly. Always come back safe. Always, Jake promised. He'd made that promise before, meant it every time. He had something worth coming back to now. A family that wasn't bound by blood, but by something stronger. Choice, loyalty, love. Emma ran over, breathless and happy. Titan dropped a tennis ball at Jake's feet, tail wagging expectantly. Jake threw it, watched the dog sprint after it with undiminished enthusiasm. Emma leaned against him, small and warm. You're my hero, you know that? Jake knelt down to her level, his voice serious. I'm not a hero, Emma. I'm just a person who decided to stand up. And that's something anyone can do. Anyone can choose to be brave. Anyone can choose to help someone who needs it. That's not special. That's just being human the way we're supposed to be. But lots of people don't, Emma said, with the clear-eyed wisdom of a child who'd seen the worst of humanity and the best. No, they don't, but you will. You're going to grow up and do amazing things, help so many people, because you've learned that standing up matters. That being afraid doesn't mean you can't be brave. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look away. Emma hugged him tight. I love you, Jake. Something broke open in Jake's chest, something that had been frozen since children died in Kandahar while he'd been trying to save them. Tears burned his eyes. He hugged Emma back, this child who wasn't his by blood but was absolutely his by every measure that mattered. I love you too. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jake sat at Sarah's kitchen table, reviewing files for the Arizona case. Sarah worked beside him, cross-referencing information through her law enforcement databases. Titan slept under the table, his weight against Jake's feet, a constant comfort. This was life now. Not isolation, not running from trauma, but running toward purpose, toward the people who needed protection, toward justice that the system couldn't always provide. Jake's phone buzzed with a new message. Another request for help, this one from Nevada. He read it, made notes, added it to the growing list. There were too many. They couldn't help everyone, but they could help some. And each person they helped was a victory against the darkness. Each family saved was proof that evil doesn't always win. Each corrupt official brought down was a message that power isn't absolute, that ordinary people standing together can defeat extraordinary evil. Sarah looked up from her laptop, saw the expression on his face. You okay? Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, for the first time in a long time. I actually am. She reached across the table, took his hand. You found what you were looking for, peace. No, Jake said. I found something better. I found a reason to fight. And sometimes that's more important than peace. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold. Stars scattered across the darkness like promises. Inside, a family sat together, planning how to help strangers, how to stand up to evil, how to be the people the world needed, even when it was hard and dangerous and terrifying. A retired Navy SEAL who'd thought his war was over had discovered it was just beginning. But this war wasn't fought with bullets and bombs in distant countries. It was fought in small towns and quiet communities, standing beside people who'd been failed by systems meant to protect them. And for the first time since he'd left the service, Jake Mercer felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Because somewhere out there, someone was waiting for a hero. Someone was praying for help that wouldn't come through official channels. Someone was facing impossible odds alone. And when duty called, when justice demanded action, when the innocent needed protection, Jake Mercer and Titan would answer. Not because they were heroes, but because they'd chosen to stand up. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Jake's position? Would you have walked away, or would you have fought for justice? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that courage still exists in this world, that one person standing up can make all the difference. Because the truth is simple and eternal. Evil only wins when good people do nothing. And as long as there are people willing to stand, willing to fight, willing to protect those who cannot protect themselves, hope survives. Jake Mercer learned that lesson in a small Montana town facing corruption that seemed unbeatable. He learned it protecting a police officer and her daughter from forces that wanted them dead. And now he carries that lesson forward, one case at a time, one family at a time. Proving that warriors don't stop fighting when they come home. They just find new battles worth fighting. And beside him always, a German shepherd named Titan, loyal unto death, fierce in protection, gentle with the innocent. Together they walk into darkness so others can live in light. Together they stand when others cannot. Together they answer the call that most people never hear. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone needs help. Someone is facing evil alone. And when they cry out into the void, hoping someone will hear, Jake Mercer and Titan are listening, ready to respond, ready to fight, ready to stand. God bless you all, and remember, you have more courage inside you than you know. Sometimes all it takes is choosing to use it.